In this video, I'd like to talk to you about how to study philosophy. Now, I know there are some of you out there who have tried and given up because it's too confusing, it's too difficult. You need to know too much to get started. It depends which book you pick up first, but you may have had that experience. Others of you may have stuck with it for a little while, but then somehow hit a wall and given up. And it's possible that you are just wanting to get started and you feel like there are too many options. You don't really know where to begin. Who knows what your exact situation is, but of all the things that could be happening, if you're watching this video, you'd like to learn to study philosophy, or you'd like to learn to do it better if you've already begun. So how to study philosophy. Now, the first thing I have to say is a little bit, how could you put this? There's no single right way. It is going to depend on your specific interests, your specific abilities, your passions, and all kinds of things that are unique to you. Okay, so I'm going to give some general outlines, but I also want you to know that finding what works for you is very important. I would say that one of the first things that you should do is you should identify the questions that you have that have arisen from your life that you would regard as philosophical without even having to explain exactly what makes them philosophical. Okay, so you might wonder whatever it is for you. Okay, for me personally, it was questions having to do with two things. There's questions having to do with the soul, with God, with mysticism, with transcendent experiences, with what it is to be human, fully human, with peak moments of intensity, with trying to understand the heights and the depths of the human being and our, not even just our place in the world, but our relationship to the world and to God. So you could say, in my case in particular, it was a kind of theological impulse or imperative, a mystical even impulse or imperative, since I was reading the works of the mystics. Mysticism was in a way my introduction to philosophy. Actually, the first philosophy book I ever read was Plato's Republic. Well, the first philosophy book I ever studied as an undergraduate was Plato's Republic, after having read on my own all kinds of works of mysticism. And that was a beautiful moment for me personally, because in Plato, I saw traces of, more than traces of, okay? I saw evidence of the heights of mystical illumination, but there was something more that I hadn't seen in the works of the mystics proper. There was some rational articulation and concern with ordinary everyday politics, you could say, or with conceptions that weren't always so nebulous, abstract, divine, and exalted. After all, Plato teaches us something about justice, about war, about the regime. So when I read Plato, for me personally, I said, aha, I thought this. I had this, probably in my first maybe week as an undergraduate, I thought, oh, I see. Okay. The philosophers who are sort of the experts in the rational articulation of things, they need the mystics who take you above what can be expressed and sort of put a capstone on that ascent to the highest things. And the mystics, they need the philosophers, because a mystic may have had some intuitive grasp of the whole, but he lacks the conceptual rigor with which to articulate the entirety of human affairs and human concerns. And also, strangely enough, philosophy in its concern with things other than, in addition to the heights of mystical religious speculation, it proves to be more comprehensive, because including reflection on the political community in our thought process is an expansion. We've expanded beyond just the soul and its relationship to God, and we've started to think about man and his relationship to man, and so on. Okay, so putting the pieces together of philosophy and mysticism, again, for me personally, on the basis of Plato's Republic, was a breakthrough moment. But yours could happen in some other way. Maybe you have a deep moral concern with evil, with why good people suffer and why bad people thrive or seem to thrive at times. Maybe you had rosy glasses on the world, and then you read a news story that broke your heart and shattered your faith in humanity, and now you're trying to understand that. Maybe there's a historical event For many Jews of the last century, the Holocaust forced upon them deep reflection about the meaning of history, of belief, of faith, of religious community, again, of morality, of evil. And you could try to understand too what what happened there, not just economically, not just sociologically, you see, but how do we make sense of it? So somehow there's something sense making about philosophy. People are attracted to it they want to know, they really want to know. They want to get to the foundations. They want to understand as deeply as possible something that is meaningful and that can't necessarily be weighed or measured or quantified, but that has this deeply qualitative element to it. And really, again, meaning and understanding the big things. Even this sense you may have, this intuition you may have, that there are things that are more important than other things. Okay, that not everything is exactly equally important. That may be an entryway into philosophy, because suddenly you start to think, well, what are the most important questions? And what are the most important topics and issues? You probably have some notion or hunch of what they are, but are you right? So this idea of trying to really see things clearly at a deep level is quite fundamental. Another thing that's very important, this may be one way that you get into philosophy, and you may already notice it as you think about what philosophy is the importance of the question, of questioning, of not resting content with an answer, of asking why, what about, what if, how, and just pursuing that further and not stopping as early as you might stop if you didn't have a philosophical inclination. Why is it this way? Are we asking the question correctly? Are these the only answers that are available to us? Is there something that we've neglected? Why does this phenomenon occur to us this way and not that way? All those sorts of things are part of what it is to philosophize. So you can help yourself in the study of philosophy by practicing that, not in a forced way, although you could see like, okay, I'm going to, sometimes when you're learning piano or guitar, you have to sit down and force yourself to do the scales. You may not have the touch of the muse right from the beginning, and suddenly you're writing brilliant songs as the angel of harmony takes over your hands or something like that. No, you may actually just have to put yourself through the paces. So there's a way to put yourself through the paces philosophically. There are philosophical exercises that you could do. I mean, wherever you find yourself watching this, you can stop for a minute and say, okay, I'm going to come up with a list of 30 questions that are more or less philosophical on the basis of right now what I'm experiencing. So, okay, how do I know that what I'm seeing is real? Maybe you think that's a philosophical question. How is it possible that I'm sitting in this chair, in this room, so my body is very localized, and yet I'm able to think about something far away, and moreover, I'm able to think about something that has no place, like number. What's the place of number? So I said, what's the place of my body here and now? Yeah, I could identify it. Latitude, longitude, pretty much down to a high degree of accuracy. But what's the mind? Why am I able to think beyond where I am? And does that mean that there's another part of me or something else to me that I am, my mind has access to the realm of number, but my body has only limited access to the realm of space? So you could think about, once you start, there are all kinds of things you can think about, okay? Now, that's the first thing that I think is extremely helpful. Well, let's say in no particular order, okay? But the first thing that I'm mentioning, yeah, you know what? There is a particular order. I do think that having this inner demand for understanding is a kind of prerequisite, even though, like I said, you can either train it or you can just sort of have it burst on the scene all at once, like a flash of lightning. Okay, but in any event, find the questions that motivate you, find the issues that you care about, find the things that are troubling you. Okay, and I would also say you shouldn't immediately feel forced to classify them as philosophical. So let's say that you had a dream, and your dream later in the day, it seems like something that you dreamt about happens. Okay, or you had a dream and it seems like somebody that you used to love, but that you've lost through human mortality seems to speak to you or address you or be there with you or comfort you or whatever the case is. So a dream is an appropriate, maybe you're like, what is dreaming? Why do I dream? And there are elements of that question that are psychological. There are elements of the question that are maybe physiological. So you don't have to necessarily be quick to categorize your interest, but eventually, as you work things through, you'll get a feel for the way in which and the level at which and the means by which you approach a question, which broadly speaking could be categorized, if you need to categorize it, as philosophical. Okay, so just be open to those, as I say, pressing questions. If there's some question that you're getting deep into and you have a feeling that it concerns something very important. So if I go to the store and I say, should I buy organic bananas or not organic bananas? Or maybe I should just buy grapes. In and of itself, wouldn't necessarily think that's a philosophical question. Maybe there's a way in which you can deepen it to make it one, but okay, so you get the sense. Now, the next thing that's going to be extremely, extremely helpful, I consider this to be absolutely essential and non-negotiable, is that you need to combine your personal interest, your pressing feelings and questions about all these things with the writings of the great thinkers. Now, I'm going to explain to you why. There are many reasons why, but I'll explain a few reasons why. Number one, the great thinkers have spent a lot of time working through in great detail their attempted elaboration of many, if not all, of the things that you will encounter as a philosophical question. You'll be surprised to learn maybe that you're not the first person who's ever thought about it. Not that that's not that that detracts from your experience. In fact, it opens the door to something that will enrich your experience very deeply. The community of great thinkers that you can learn from as they cast an illuminating light on your self-reflection and on your search for understanding. So you have to study the great books, the great writings, the great thinkers, and even without knowing at the outset, who are the great writers? What are the great books? It's enough as a first approximation to go with the names that you're familiar with and that you can count on one hand, okay? Plato, Aristotle, right there, there's a lifetime. You could just do Plato and Aristotle and never do anything else, and your mind will be blown repeatedly. Okay, but maybe it's Nietzsche, that's something you heard about Nietzsche, or Hegel, or Kierkegaard. Start somewhere. Start somewhere and you'll feel your way into this world. You'll feel your way into the world of people who have sought to express in writing their understanding of these pressing questions. And sometimes you'll be on their wavelength and sometimes you won't be. Sometimes you'll see something that speaks directly to what you have felt and you're like, wow, he's articulated exactly what I want to say, what I've experienced. And sometimes it'll be like, wait a minute, what is he talking about? I know he's saying something, but I don't know what it is. I know that there's something important here and I have to work to try to get it. So there's a whole spectrum of things that you might have once you start studying. But you're really going to impoverish yourself if you isolate your self-reflection from that great record that we call the works of the philosophers, that great record of writing, of exploration. And as I say, eventually the categorizations, you'll get your own sense of how they work. Because right now I said, just think of the philosophers as the people you associate automatically with philosophy, the people who are recognized canonically as philosophers. But it may happen later in your life that you're reading the works of a psychologist or of a fiction writer or of somebody else, and in their works you find valuable philosophical statements or speculations or considerations. You see what I mean? But to begin with, you're really on solid grounds if you just stick to the canon, the canonical. Again, take top 5 names that come to mind when you think philosophy. Descartes, okay, maybe I don't want to say the names because for you it's going to be what it is, and that's a starting point. You can get into that. You don't even have to. I mean, another thing you can do is, if you're really consumed by the question of evil, maybe you just pick up a book on the philosophy of evil and you start there. And you'll see that in these books that are sort of topical in general, as opposed to, canonical. So you're not reading Plato's Republic or Aristotle's Ethics or Nietzsche's Zarathustra. You're reading, a book on the problem of evil, or a book on post-Holocaust morality, or a book on the meaning of mysticism or nihilism. Okay, whatever it happens to be, whatever it is that interests you. And what you're going to find before too long is that those books are going to refer you back to the canonical authors, because that's just the way it works. The canon is the people who thought most deeply, and everybody else who thinks uses them as a relevant touch point. So in a book on the problem of evil, you may see reference to Augustine, you may see reference to other thinkers, and then you just pursue those threads. Okay, so I know this is a little bit long-winded, but you take your personal interest and you go kind of, all in on that in a way. You let that little seed of philosophical passion grow and blossom in you. You sort of water it and nourish it and guide it with the recognized canon at first of great philosophical thinkers. And you leave yourself open to happy accidents. Maybe there will be a book that you pick up off the shelf because it reaches out to you and it happens to be exactly what you needed to hear, and it guides you into a territory. I mean, there's room for discovery. I myself, in my history, I'm telling you after the fact how I got into all of this. But at the time of my studies, there was a lot of meandering. There was a lot of just random accident and synchronicities and serendipities and all the rest of it. So that's why I didn't want to force this into a single mold, because I think there are many different ways that this can unfold for a person. One of the most tragic things I saw as a student in philosophy, once I had fallen in love with it, was people who did have that sort of latent philosophical fire, but they went to a teacher who really just poured water over it, destroyed it, and left them hating philosophy. So that's the worst thing that could happen, okay? If you let somebody crush your spirit, I mean, unless it's like you're reading Hegel and he's crushing your spirit because it's too difficult to understand, that's different, because that's part of the process of getting onto the wavelength of somebody who's a difficult thinker. But if you have somebody if you find that something you're listening to or engaging with is disenchanting you or destroying your love for philosophy, or making you think that this whole discipline is bogus or something like that, watch out for that. That's usually a red flag. I would say that's usually a red flag, especially when you're getting started. You don't want, as a puppy dog of the philosophical race, to use a phrase from Leo Strauss, you don't want to be, you don't want to be discouraged from developing, because it's very satisfying. It's humanizing, it's satisfying, and it's deeply important. So don't let yourself get discouraged when things get tough, or when something isn't resonating with you, vibing with you. There are a lot of things that are called philosophy, and not everything is going to strike you in the same way with the same sort of intensity. So just, have some patience there, have some understanding, don't give up, and you can find what speaks to you. Yeah. Now, you also don't want philosophy just to serve your pre-existing interests and opinions. Like I said, there's some sort of interplay, because you also have to be open to learning from from other people, from the thinkers, from the books, from the writings. There may be something that you weren't expecting. You may have to revise your outlook. Okay, so you want to deepen what's there for you, and you also want to discover what's not yet there for you. It's nice when you're learning to think philosophically to have people to talk to have people to discuss with. So find a circle of friends who are philosophical, maybe just one, even one good friend that you can talk to. You'll end up talking till the wee hours of the morning with the right kind of person. So try to find one friend if possible. And you know what? If you can't, then I think you can recognize that the books themselves are great friends. In fact, you may have some of these books for longer than you have some of your friends, some of your best friends, okay? When a book really reaches, I just have some books over to my side here, so I'm touching them and thinking about them and remembering the good times we spent together, okay? That could happen too. You'll find a few books like that that will be with you for the rest of your life. So even if you can't find a friend to discuss with, which I hope that you do, the books are there for you too. And if you decide to talk about what you're thinking and to write about what you're thinking, to publish, to share your thoughts, which maybe you definitely want to do, or maybe you don't want to do at all, or maybe you're on the fence about it. But if you do it, one of the nice things I think about philosophy is that it forms a kind of magnetic force, and you will attract certain people to yourself when you publicize the nature of your interest. You'll repel certain people too, but that just comes with the territory. The more interesting thing, I think, for the quality of life is what you attract. Okay, so you start writing about Kierkegaard or Nietzsche or Heidegger, Hegel, Plato, Aristotle, evil, love, whatever it is. And I'm not promising you an audience. I'm not promising you that people will read you. Everybody's busy and everybody has a long reading list, but it is possible, and it's even, I would say, probable that you will attract somebody into your sphere of discourse, or however you want to think about it. Like, you'll find somebody to talk to about what you've been writing, because they will also be interested in that topic. And that's a nice thing. Okay, so you take your interest, existential, personal, soulful, passionate, okay, intimate, genuine, true, deep, authentic, all of that. You combine it with the canon, with great teachers, great writers, great thinkers, people who have traveled this road much longer than you have. You get into that, you start to learn the arguments, the literature, the field, the vocabulary. You deepen what you already understand. You discover things that you don't yet understand. You bring people into your world that you can discuss this with. You take an interest. Maybe you go to a conference, or maybe you go whatever, okay? But suddenly you have a small community, as small as one, okay? A small community with whom you can discuss these things. And then you do it forever. And then you die. Okay, so that's how you study philosophy. And that's what I would say. So the first magic moment, the second magic moment, the third magic moment, I don't want to prescribe what it will look like for you personally, but I hope that you experience it. And as I say, you can become a great musician even without that prophetic inspiration from the muse, if you do some of the work. So the work of philosophy, you have to sit down and read something that's difficult. And you have to not give up when it's difficult. Maybe you ask for help. Maybe you find a commentary. Maybe you hire a tutor. Maybe you get a teacher. Maybe you just pause, you slow down, you look up the references. I'll give you one quick example. A student of mine, the student that probably has worked with me the longest, has taken all of my courses and done private tutoring with me for a long time. His journey into political philosophy began with this book, Alan Bloom's book called The Closing of the American Mind. And he wasn't expecting it, but as he read it, he found deep reflection on the nature of education. And for the first time, he heard names like Rousseau, okay, Heidegger, I think he discovered from this book, and even, much of what Bloom writes about Socrates. Not everybody knows. Why would you know? Hobbes, Locke, Machiavelli. Once you've studied political philosophy long enough, you take these names for granted. But if you're brand new to the field, you may never have read any of these people or even know the slightest thing about them. So, recognizing that there was something extremely valuable in this book, something deeper than what he had heard elsewhere on the topic of the crisis of higher education, which is the thing that impelled him towards this book, his personal concern about the crisis of higher education. So like I said, you have to bring yourself to the table, right? He had a concern with the crisis of higher education, came across this book, saw that this book understood the matter more deeply than he did, articulated it more comprehensively than he did, pointed to paths that he hadn't considered before. And suddenly, he's reading the books that are discussed here. Plato's Republic, Rousseau, and these other thinkers, okay? So, Marx, Hegel, Calvin, Freud, Bloom mentions many different people. And if you're trying to understand and evaluate and assess and learn from his argument, you have to know something about who they are. And so this book set my student off on a lifelong learning task through the great books. And he writes about them and he thinks about them and he goes to conferences and he discusses them and he works with me to understand them. And that's one way that it could look to enter onto a philosophical path. So I hope that you found these comments helpful. Again, as a maximalist in a way, I want to say that for all I know, you'll find some completely other way into philosophy. I know several friends of mine started out with math, or they started out in the sciences, or they started out in software. They started out wherever they started out, and somehow through their work and through their life, they recognize that they have quote unquote philosophical interests, and that becomes a pursuit unto itself, even though it touches all these other parts of a person's life as well. So that's what I have to say. I think that's what's helpful. And I think that that's hopefully going to be something that alerts you to the signals that philosophy is ready for you and that you are ready for philosophy.